All right, we'll begin now. So, hello everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. We are excited to have you all here for the third quarterly meeting of the Global Coalition to promote comprehensive sexuality and personal safety education. We'd like to request everyone to ensure that we maintain a respectful and safe space for everyone. So, let's be mindful of the language we use and how we interact with each other. On that note, let's begin. So, the Global Coalition was launched in October 2023 and brings stakeholders from several nations together to understand the region specific nuances, barriers, and possibilities of sexuality and personal safety education. Our mission is to foster a collaborative environment where diverse perspectives can converge to ensure dignified and safe spaces for every child. We believe that personal safety is not an individual responsibility, it's a community responsibility. So, with this in mind, I'd like to begin this important conversation by introducing the moderator for today's panel, Dr. Sangeeta Saxena. Dr. Sangeeta is a gynecologist who co-founded Enfold Proactive Health Trust India in 2001 to provide indigenously developed sexuality and personal safety education to children and adults, including individuals with disabilities, through Enfold's Suvidha Kit. She co-authored the On Track series for school students published by Macmillan India and established postgraduate program courses at universities. Additionally, Dr. Sangeeta contributed to the Karnataka and Madhya Pradesh state child protection policies and collaborated with various Indian state governments on women's and children's safety issues. I now invite Dr. Sangeeta to set the context and take the discussion forward.
Thank you so much, Khushi. Once again, a warm welcome to all of you. We do believe that this coalition belongs to each one of us, even though Enfold may have initiated it, and that together we can create safer and more dignified spaces for our children. This is our third quarterly meeting. The first meeting was held on the 10th of January, and there we covered the basics of what is personal safety education. We'll refer to at PS as PSE, and comprehensive sexuality education, that will be referred to as CSE. And we also covered the sexual development of children up to 7 years of age. In the second meeting, which we held on the 10th of April, we discussed the meaning of the word sexual. This is crucial because it is often conflated with the act of sex. However, it is best understood as an ability to perceive and respond to certain stimuli. And it is akin to children being born visual, just as the visual sense develops as they begin to focus more and they begin to perceive color as they grow. So does the body's and brain's ability to perceive and respond to these stimuli, the sexual stimuli, develops and matures as the child grows into an adult. We also discussed socio-sexual play between children, how adults can respond without producing any guilt in the children or reprimanding them for it, and how we could differentiate it from concerning sexual behavior, which may indicate that the child is being exposed to sexual abuse. We also spoke about how to respond to children's questions about pregnancy and childbirth. Now, all these recordings, as well as the PPTs we used and the report, is available on the website, as you can see. And I encourage you, those of you who may not have attended the previous meetings, to please go to this. And in this meeting, we have 4 distinguished panelists coming in from 4 different countries and contexts to bring in a diversity of perspectives and enrich our discussions today. I will introduce a panelist just before I pose a question to them, so it would be easy to relate to the person who is answering the question. And we have a different question for each of the panelists. After that, we aim to have still 25 minutes left over for the participants to ask any question to the panelists or share their views. With that, let me begin. And our first panelist today is Vanessa Hamilton. Vanessa is a founder of the education business Talking the talk healthy sexuality education. She is an award-winning author, highly respected speaker, podcaster, blog writer, and also a lecturer at the University of Melbourne, Australia. She has over 25 years of experience as a registered sexual health nurse. Her journey into working with young children, however, began when she found herself struggling to answer young kids' questions around sexuality. So today we will have the perspectives from her, not only as an educator, but also as a parent. Welcome, Vanessa. And first question goes to you, and that is, what principles and core concepts should be included or are being included in the courses or materials that you are developing and courses that you are running when it comes to CSE and PSC programs for under 7-year-olds? And why are you including such concepts and such?
Thank you so much for having me. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging that I'm coming to you from the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. This is unceded land, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land, so commonly known as Melbourne, Australia. Before I talk about the principles and core concepts, I'd like to talk about the why. So comprehensive sexuality education and personal safety education programs should be included for under 7-year-olds because we know absolutely from global evidence that it keeps them safe and healthy. And it has hardly anything to do with sex, as was mentioned before. It's about human sexuality. And also, it actually is children's human right to learn accurate information age appropriately about their bodies and about relationships, and to learn about that from trusted sources such as home and the classroom. So global evidence tells us children are safer, healthier and happier, but most importantly, they are less vulnerable to abuse when they've had adequate, age-appropriate, accurate, comprehensive information from a very young age throughout their whole schooling and development years. That education has to come from parents and from the classroom. Parents need to be involved, but often parents haven't had an adequate sexuality education themselves or enough information on how to have these conversations themselves. Onto the term about sex and sexuality. Sex is not for children, but human sexuality is. That's why these programs are relevant for them. So, for example, basically knowing the accurate names of their body parts, knowing about body and protective safety. We need to do these programs so they're aware of puberty changes before it happens to them, because we know they manage it much better when they have this good information. And of course, they should know about the amazing story of how humans reproduce, and they should learn that age appropriately from a trusted adult. Another important why we need to do these programs, because if we don't do it at school or from home, when and how will they hear it? If we do not deliver this information, where will they find this information out from? So we know that if children don't get accurate information, they will find it from the world around them. They're getting a sexuality education every day, whether we like it or not. But is it the one we want them to have? They're getting it from the internet, from their peers, from popular culture, from advertising, from music, from movies. So I do ask parents to think about who, if you're a parent out there, who do you want to be the person who gives your child information about human sexuality, growing up and developing, about consent and respect for relationships? Hopefully, as a parent, you say that it's you and you want them to get that from you and from school as well. Just a tip for the adults in the room. We have an understanding in our own heads about what sex means because we're adults, but I implore adults to remove those layers of what we think about sex and sexuality, especially those based on fear and negativity, because it gets in the way of the conversations we need to have with children. So on to the main question, what are the principles and core concepts? The basics, and I'm going to go through these quickly. Naming body parts, protective behaviours, respect for relationships, consent, gender-based violence, simple reproduction. They're just the simple ones for 7-year-olds. So for example, naming body parts, just the simplest of genitals, external genitals, and moving more towards internal reproductive parts such as ovaries and uterus as they get older. But most importantly, this needs to be done without shame. There's nothing shameful about these body parts. So culturally, people need to think about what are the best names for their children to have for these body parts. So for example, it's okay to have family names, but it really is important that they have scientific names, because we know that then children are more readily, easily able to report if something is wrong with those body parts or if something is happening to them. They need to understand the differences of bodies. I like to suggest using books where children can see age-appropriate books to see the different body parts. As far as protective behaviours, I'm going to go through this quite quickly, but there's really 5 core principles of them understanding that their body is their body. It belongs to them. They can decide who touches it and who doesn't. Early warning signs, teaching them that their body tells them when they're unsafe. These are principles that they need to know, that their body tells them when something is happening, they should report it. Who should report it? Who should they report it to? Children need to know help-seeking behaviours. Who are the adults in their world who they can report problems to? Secrets and surprises. We should implicitly tell them that no one should tell them to keep a secret from their parents or their trusted adults. And adults should say to them, you can tell us anything. We need to provide an environment that tells them that this is a speakable topic. This is not shameful about our bodies. This is speakable and you can speak to us. Sometimes just on that point, parents worry that the children might go and tell other children about the conversations they've had. So we say to the children, you can ask us any questions. This household is open for you asking questions, even if you think they might be rude or not appropriate. That's okay, we'll answer them. But it's not okay to talk about this in the playground with the other children. That's their adult's job to do. And talking about simply under their bathers or under their whatever clothing that is appropriate is their private parts, but that also includes their mouth. That's just for them, and being really specific about that. As far as respectful relationships and consent, I'm going to talk about those together. Consent to 0 to 7-year-olds has nothing to do with sex. I wrote a book for 8 to 12-year-olds about consent, and the concepts in there are about relationships, not sexual ones. So relationships are required for humanity and they must be consensual, whether it's work, play, school, friendships, or romantic relationships later on. And so talking to them about family relationships compared to romantic relationships. And consent for children is learning to mutually negotiate an enjoyable game together to play in the playground and making sure that everybody's happy to participate and learning how to manage their disappointment. If their friend says, no, I don't want to play that, and how are they going to respond? It's learning empathy. It's learning verbal and non-verbal cues. It's learning their body boundaries and feelings. And on to gender-based violence and rigid gender stereotypes that we know are harmful as far as gender-based violence in our society, talking about diversity and that everyone can be strong and everyone can be gentle. I'm just giving you simple tips for each of these very, very big topics. And of course, simple reproduction, the amazing story of how the sperm and the egg meet, and that process is only for adults and it's private, and that there are other forms of creating families as well. Shall I go on to the second part of the question, or did you ask me that, Sangeeta? I don't know, or shall I wait for you to ask me that?
Yeah, please. It is the why, the what and the why part.
Yeah. And also the vocabulary of talking about why and what vocabulary we should use for these topics.
Yes, yes.
So number one, they should be accurate. We know global evidence tells us that children should have accurate information. It's not okay to say that the vulva, for example, is a cookie, okay? Because when a child reports that someone has touched their cookie, an adult doesn't understand that they're actually talking about their vulva. Accurate science names are important. It's okay to have family names as well. Talking about accuracy as far as kissing, for example. So there can be family kissing and then there can be romantic kissing, which is for adults only, not for children. So being very specific about that. Knowing how babies are made. I'm going to give you a very simple example that you could adapt to your family and your cultural expectations of the amazing story of reproduction. There's lots of ways to create babies, But one of the ways is that when a person with a penis and testicles and a person with a vagina and uterus and ovaries, they decide they want to make a baby. They talk a lot about it. They respect each other. They love each other. They're married. Add in all of your own values. And you say that when they're ready, they make a decision about choosing a private place and time. They'll be enjoying each other's bodies. You'll say that clothing will be removed from those genital areas. And when they're ready, the vagina will accept the penis will deliver the sperm, and the sperm will travel up to meet the egg. Now, children might giggle, or they might say, that's disgusting. Why would they do that? And that's your perfect opportunity to also add in that story is only for adult bodies and minds. It is not for children. And adults actually like it. We need to talk about positivity and pleasure so they know to expect that when they're adults. But you also add your values and the laws around the ages that is appropriate for humans to do. Okay, so age appropriate, no shame, use proper terms and tell stories. But parents, my message to you is be the askable and tellable adults that your children need you to be about this topic.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. That was absolutely wonderful. And as you repeatedly said, you can adapt it for your culture, which Zia will be talking more about later. I would also emphasize that we also build in respect for all parts of the bodies and their functions, and not use any ambiguous names like a cookie, and how we need to give factual and authentic answers. You may use simple words like baby cell and dada baby cell, mama baby cell, a baby house, like giving an analogy that the child can understand. The child is only 3 years old or 4 years old. It may help. And if it is culturally not appropriate for you to use the word penis and vagina as such, and that the penis enters the vagina, you may say when the dada baby cell enters the birth passage. So you can make it culturally more appropriate that way. Diversity in sexes, diversity in the various kind of bodies we have, and diversity is a norm in nature, can also be brought in right from the very beginning, because no concept is introduced for the first time later on. It's just like mathematics, you start early with the same 2 + 2 makes 4, and then other things can get added. And the personal safety rules and personal safety guide that we talk about, clothing, touching, and talking, a lot of it is available on our website, and we will show that towards the end, perhaps, if we have the time, but on our website it is there. And we can also talk about the personal safety guide, like what to do in case you find that somebody is breaking these rules. So the simple say no if you can, go away as and when you can, and tell a safe adult or adults until you get the help you need. And also build in responsibility and accountability in your daily conversations with the child, so that later on it doesn't come as a surprise that, oh, I'm responsible for my actions, is it? Okay. So with that, we move on to our second speaker, that is Dharani Priscilla. She is a human rights activist, gender consultant based in Sri Lanka. She works towards promoting digital inclusivity and addressing online violence. Dharani collaborates with organizations like the UN Women and the Sexual Violence Research Initiative, focusing on gender, sexuality, and online behavior. She has extensively designed and facilitated trainings on digital safety for marginalized communities, including women and LGBTQIA individuals, empowering them to navigate online spaces safely and confidently. So welcome, Dharani. Good to have you here with us.
Thank you, Sangeeta. If you hear 2 children screaming, please ignore it. It's very appropriate for this discussion, but they're my neighbors. Yes, hi, Sangeeta. Nice to meet you, and nice to meet everyone here.
Yeah. Could you up your volume a little bit? I just thought it was a little low. So the question to you, Dharani, is what strategies and approaches can be used to discuss CSE and PSE with children under 7 years of age?
Yes, so I'll try to go through them as quickly as possible. The first one is especially for educators in the room and for people in the education sector. it's very important to understand the difference between translating and localizing. Because a lot of people, including myself, when I started working on this, we tended to translate resources when we were working with, especially with younger children, because in countries like Sri Lanka, we don't have a lot of original resources. We don't have a lot of experts, at least at the time. So what we would do is translate existing resources or adapt them. So it's very important that we think about the concept of localization, especially when we talk to children, because it means that we are adapting what we're saying to our local culture, to our local communities, and to our local values. For example, in Sri Lanka, I'm not just talking about, translating from English to our local languages, but even in a multilingual country like Sri Lanka or India, there's a tendency for material to be developed in your majority language. For example, here it's Sinhala, and then it would be translated into the minority language. And as a child from a minority community, it was very interesting to look at the examples that were given there, because the graphics would be designed according to my culture, because the girl would be wearing like a bindi, a pottu, and like a Tamil dress. But the example would not make sense. The graphic wouldn't make sense, but the example or the information would not make sense at all. So that can be confusing for children. And that has been confusing for a lot of kids who come from marginalized backgrounds, depending on the language they speak, or their religion, or their culture, or other various identity factors. So the first strategy is to always localize and not just to translate that content. And it's very important that this information is, grounded on their community and their culture to be kind of understood and accepted better. The second strategy is one that really works with younger children, is to incorporate arts and culture into these conversations. Especially, in South Asian countries, storytelling is a huge part of our culture. We use stories to instill morals. We use stories to talk about our values. So when we talk about sex, or when we talk about sexuality, or when we talk about concepts like respect, consent, it's important that we leverage arts and culture, especially storytelling, to normalize and also to internalize various concepts of CSE, and that has worked a lot in Sri Lanka, as well as in several other countries, using things like puppets, graphics, comic books, using superheroes, whatever that works with these kids from different cultures. I think arts and culture is a huge buy-in into having these conversations with younger kids. The third one, which is where I do a lot of my work, is to align CSE with the current educational priorities. So in Sri Lanka, the current educational priorities, especially after COVID-19, is digital education, because digital education is still a thing, especially with, schools where exams are happening, and there's a lot of, local, there's a bit of chaos in our country right now with the economic crisis. So people are still reliant on digital education. So we utilize digital education and digital safety as a way to talk about CSE. Because a lot of parents were concerned about what their kids were doing online, what are they watching online. So they started being interested in their children's safety. And it gave us the opportunity to talk about safety, about consent, about bodily autonomy. So think about what your current educational priorities are where you live for your children, either in their school or in the government or the state or the education system, and try to utilize it. Another education priority for a lot of schools is sports. There are schools that are very sports oriented, very there are different priorities. So try to find the priority and try to align CSE with it if there is no way to talk about CSE directly. The next one is, of course, again, thinking about the stakeholders who are involved. In Sri Lanka, the conversation on sex, safety, all of that is spearheaded by our health ministry. So our health ministry is the one that handles working with children, working with women, all of that. So we work closely with the health ministry to make sure that we are aligned with the key players here so that we have more buy-in. If I personally go to a school and say, I want to talk to kids about this, so we should talk to kids about this, there's not a lot of reception or there's not a lot of trust. But if I go with somebody from the health ministry, it really helps. It really helps. And they trust you. They also give you an opportunity and it allows you to build more relationships. The next one, and the important one, I think Vanessa already touched on this, is to talk about, am I clear or is it bad?
Dharani, could you increase the volume? It's clear so far, but I think some participants are finding it difficult.
I removed my headset. Is that better now?
Much better. Thanks a lot, Dharani.
Something is wrong with the earphones. I apologize. The important one there is to involve parents. Because when I work with kids who are older than 10, they always say things like, oh, I don't want to hear about this. I can Google it. I can look it up online. I don't need an adult to talk to me about sex or sexuality. I can look it up online. But for kids under the age of 7, that's not always an opportunity. It's not a luxury that they have. So talking to kids about sex and sexuality in home, and training parents and equipping them with the tools and the resources they need is crucial, because the education that we provide them, or these conversations that we have to be continuous, and they need to be able to understand that this is not a one-time chat and then it's done, because that is the idea that they when they have conversations with other people, their peers, with themselves, that it's a one-time thing. So continuous conversations are important, and this is why bringing in parents into the conversation is very, very crucial. And the last strategy that I want to touch on is more like a little tip for us. Vanessa and Sangeeta already spoke about it, which is really on language. And when it comes to language, especially in South Asia, it's very, very important that we have to find the balance between making it, medically accurate, but also rooting it in the culture. Vanessa mentioned cookie. In Sri Lanka, we have flower, or in Tamil, we say poo. And that's a very, very dangerous word to use, because I've seen newspapers, I work with the media, I see newspapers report on GBV, and when they're reporting a GBV case, they would have like a crushed flower as an imagery to talk about, sexual violence. So the words that we use are very, very important. So finding the balance when we talk to younger children is very, very crucial. So I would like to end with that, to remind you that finding the balance when talking to younger children is impossible, but it's not, not achievable. We can definitely do it. If you need resources on talking about this in the South Asian context, please feel free to reach out, and I'd happy to share some of them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dharani. That was very comprehensive. I would also like to add that we have day-to-day teaching moments when we are changing the child's dress, supporting them in taking a bath, and so informing them. I have a 1-year-old granddaughter, and when we're changing her nappy, we say, okay, we're going to change your nappy, and we're going to put your dress on, and we're taking your dress off. Right? So these are conversations that need to be continuous, not a one-time conversation, but regular, relevant conversations. And in the context of disability, which we will have a separate session on, it will be covered more, but then it's extremely important there as well, answering their questions as and when they ask, and not delaying it for some later day. But if the place is not appropriate, you can say, okay, once you get home, we'll talk about this more, and then do so. So that part, and the personal safety rules and guidelines would need to be continuously talked about as and when, also reiterated as and when required. It's not like one day you sit them down and say, this is what you need to do, right? No, it is as and when the situation arises, or something is told, or they see something on television, or on the newspaper, or some other way. Also talking about responsibilities. I'm so happy that we are all reiterating the use of analogies and stories, and traffic rules are a great way to talk about personal safety rules as well. And also have it like a discussion. Ask what the child already knows or what they think about it, and you might be surprised. and then fill in the gaps and the if any misconceptions are there. And it doesn't matter how old the child is. If the child can speak, ask them what they think about. Also, for your schools, ask them if such education is a part of their program, if they're part of their curricula. Ask for child protection policies and such, so that when the pressure is there from the parents, the schools are more likely to also then provide. With that, I move on to our third speaker, Mohammad Ziaur Rahman. He is the founder and chief executive of Awaz Foundation Pakistan Center for Development Services. Zia is a development advocate, civil rights activist, writer, and poet who champions socioeconomic development, political empowerment for youth and women. Leading the Pakistan Development Alliance, he focuses on implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, governance, and accountability. He serves on various boards and councils and was a finalist for the Nelson Mandela Trasa Michel Award 2016 for his efforts in youth engagement and restoring local governance in Pakistan. Welcome, Zia. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
So the question to you is, how can we as adults adapt our responses to children if we are in a conservative socio-cultural religious milieu, where while at the same time we uphold children's right to authentic information, safety, and dignity? How do we strike that balance?
Thank you very much indeed, Sangeeta. And thank you very much for having me in this wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed the conversation of our speakers, especially Vanessa and the others. Since all of you know that I'm from a different background, very, very conservative background, Pakistan. And also, I have a little bit of understanding about the subcontinent and maybe somehow in the Arab region where we have these conservative societies. Historically, saying that this sexuality education was not prohibited in Roman culture, in Islamic culture, pre-Islamic culture, it was very much there. In Arab region, the tribes, they were having different traditional methodologies, traditional ways to impart sexuality education to their children, but they were quite open. The Roman culture was quite open. The Europeans, the other nations, they were quite open in sharing their thoughts. But unfortunately, the conservative societies, after the emergence of Islam, they became more conservative, even though the Islamic teachings are quite open. I tell you that in Quran, the sexuality education is very much there. It's very open. Those who understand Arab language and those who really meaningfully understand Arab language and read Quran, they will be happy to know that Quran teaches the sexuality education, body rights, what is prohibited, what is not prohibited, very openly. So, unfortunately, in the conservative societies of subcontinent, we have seen that prior to these religions, whatever, either Islam or the other religions, the people were quite open. They were like very not that much conservative, and traditionally they were communicating to their children through various means. But later on, there were like lots of challenges emerged because of the misinterpretation of religion. particularly in Pakistan, mullahs misinterpreted all these body rights and sexuality education, and we have been facing lots of challenges. In certain times, the parents were communicating to their children very easily. Like traditionally, the maternal aunts, they were communicating to the girls, and the maternal uncles, they were communicating to the boys. Uh, Paternal uncles, they were communicating to the boys very easily. Traditionally, it was happening. But now, after the emergence of like the Islam, particularly in Pakistan, those traditional ways have been diminished. Now, the uncles and aunts are not communicating, but most of the information that our young adults are getting, they are from the internet. Very recently, in 2018, we conducted this countrywide study on comprehensive sexuality education status. And it was astonishing for us that almost 82% of the respondents were saying that we are getting information from the internet, which is, to me, that information is not age appropriate. That information is not actually required by the children. The second most important source of information was mullah. A mullah was also not an appropriate information giver, because mullah is exploiter in our society. I'm sharing with you one interesting thought. Uh, there was one very respectable mullah in the subcontinent, Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanvi. He wrote one book, Bahishti Zevar. And in that Bahishti Zevar, we know that there are certain information related to the body rights, body parts, body protections, the relationship among men and women, and all sorts of comprehensive sexuality education related information. But what was happening, that Bahishti Zevar was being given to the girls at the time of marriage, on the day of marriage. So tell me how a girl uh, can be able to understand the whole information which was appropriately given in the Bahishti Zevar, and that is in the local language, on the wedding night. So it was so inappropriate. And I am personally witnessed of this, that while my mother and my father was reading Bahishti Zevar in the cold nights of winter, and we were just sitting around them. We were like four of us, and all of four are brothers. They skipped that chapter. I still remember, I was like in 7th class or something. Like, they skipped that chapter that was talking about body rights, that was talking about sexuality, that was talking about body protection and everything. Uh, so this was challenging. So traditionally the ways were there, but parents are usually shy or something, like they are prohibiting, and they are thinking that this is not appropriate to tell them prior to the time, and the time for them is only the moment of marriage. And this is quite unfortunate. So the moment of marriage means like a day before marriage, 2 days before marriage. So this is one thing. We started educating young adults from class 6 to onwards, 6 and 7, uh, in the schools in 2012. The government gave us the permission, but overall the media, they did not like that. And the news erupted in the media in Pakistan, and the education department from Punjab, the largest province of the country where 60% of our population lives, they actually um, took all our books back from the students and they burned them openly because they said that this is not the education that we should provide. And this will actually promote sexuality education, which is against the teachings of Islam, which is against our cultural norms. So this is kind of things that are happening right now. To
Yeah.
me, I think parents are the best source from to begin with. And secondly, traditional way, we need to impart training to the teachers so as they can promote sexuality education, even starting from the class 5 to onwards. The teachers can be the best source to impart uh, education to the children. Yeah.
Thank you, Zia, for that, for sharing these very disturbing, things that happen in our countries. And I would like to sum up by saying that we can look at using the words and the language. The language needs to be native. We can draw upon our cultural heritage, the stories that are told. If words um, penis, vulva, vagina are not acceptable because most of us are not English speakers at home, and we may have lost the words in our native language, then some unambiguous names like a susu or potty or no something.
Dr. Sangeeta, your screen got frozen.
That is there in our cultures, and we can also expand on our positive cultural beliefs. For example, respect. So respect, we can expand it not just for elders, but for children, for all parts of our bodies, for all functions of our bodies. So we can pick on the positive aspects of our culture or religion and expand on that. We can also refer to God or nature as that has created our bodies, and so we can build respect through that. And with those stories about consent, boundaries, personal safety, so much can be taught. And we have a lot of these in almost all religions. Stories are the universal uh, vehicle of learning, I should say, for all of us. And with that, I move on to Dr. Shakila Singh. Dr. Shakila is a gender education professor at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Durban, South Africa. She focuses her research on gender and sexuality among teens and young adults. She co-edited Gender, Sexuality and Violence in South African Educational Spaces in 2021 publication. She is committed to community engagement and has coordinated to peace-building curriculum. It was developed and co-led with her contribution, and also the critical social justice module, which addresses gender-based violence and is mandatory for all first-year students of the university. This was quite unique. I have not found a mandatory course for all university students on these topics anywhere else in the world, I should say. So welcome, Dr. Shakila, and congratulations on amazing work you're doing.
Thank you, Dr. Sangeeta. My question?
Yes, your question is, should diversity in sexuality and gender identities be included in discussions with under 7-year-olds? Will they understand it? Will it misguide them? Would it put ideas in their head? And might it affect their sexual development? We have been asked all these questions from parents. So over to you.
Thank you. So should we be talking about diverse genders and sexuality to children? Absolutely. All children should be supported to understand themselves and to respect difference in others. And this reduces stigma and contributes to personal safety of children who are seen to be different in terms of gender and sexuality. And if teaching children about sexuality is met with resistance, teaching children about diverse genders and sexualities is even more so. This childhood default is assumed to be cisgender and heterosexual. And I'll briefly explain these terms. Where any presentation of non-normative or queer behavior is met with disbelief, humor, and even disgust. When we, through our direct and indirect messages, reproduce heteronormativity, we leave children to construct their sexualities within an unsupportive culture of silence and restriction. So cisgender refers to the gender identity that matches the sex that one is assigned at birth. And this is what is considered to be normal and natural. And heteronormativity assumes the gender binary, that there are two distinct and opposite genders, and that intimate relations are most fitting between people of the opposite sex. And it positions anything outside of this norm as unnatural, abnormal, and unacceptable. We promote this in our everyday interactions. For instance, any young girl who shares her toys with a boy must by default have a boyfriend. And any boy who plays with a girl, that must be his girlfriend or he must be girly. So we impose these romantic themes upon any opposite sex interaction, making it the only possible relationship with that pairing and the only possible pairing of intimate relationships. So imagine the conflicts for children who are outside of that norm. And your question about will they be able to understand? Is it too complex? Well, we have to think about how to make it understandable. An essential first step is to recognize that children are not too young to learn about diverse genders and sexuality. And we know the idea of that children are innocent and asexual is widespread amongst adults. And such perceptions ignore the importance of sexuality as a natural part of childhood development and deny children the opportunity to express themselves and be supported. Excuse me. And as we have heard from the previous panelists, age-appropriate information and methods is key. Gender diverse people often say that they knew their gender was different from a very young age. And although society's understanding of gender diversity is growing, gender diverse people can still face rejection, bullying, harassment, and social isolation. This is probably more so for children who are not supposed to be knowledgeable or sexual. This makes the world a very unsafe place for them. Some people express concern about the appropriateness of introducing ideas about diverse genders and sexualities at a young age. But just as sexuality education, as Vanessa mentioned, is not about sex and does not encourage sexual experimentation, so too teaching about diverse genders and sexuality does not promote gay and transgender lifestyle to children. And we have to remember that children are exposed to messages about gender and sexuality from a very young age, whether it's through media or peer interactions. And by providing accurate age information, appropriate information, being non-judgmental, and creating a safe and inclusive environment, we can help to counteract negative or harmful messages that children may receive elsewhere. It is understandable that some adults may feel uncomfortable or unsure about teaching about diverse genders and sexuality to young children. We cannot ignore the discomfort, but think about the best ways to address it. Those from previous generations, like myself, have grown up not having these discussions, and the unspoken lessons that these topics are taboo or inappropriate to discuss with children. And as Zia also pointed out, as adults, we have to interrogate that there is this discomfort and cultural restrictions. We have to interrogate our own biases and understand how religious and spiritual beliefs may impact on the teaching and learning process. And we cannot ignore the need for cultural relevance and contextual understandings, and also recognize the presence of multiple cultures in one context, like ours in South Africa. And even though all cultures are dynamic and people do make culture. An important consideration is how would discussions about diverse genders and sexualities go in contexts where same-sex relationships are prohibited by law? And this makes up about 65 countries in the world. Perhaps it requires engaging and building support amongst the custodians of culture in a given community. About language, referring to people in gendered terms, such as boys and girls or ladies and gentlemen, can be hurtful and exclusionary. Instead, we could use gender-neutral terms like children, students, friends. It's important not to make assumptions about a child's gender identity. Also, the assumption of what is a normal family, and that is essentially heterosexual, with one mom and one dad. And this is exclusionary to any child whose family structure looks different to this, like those who have two parents of the same gender, two moms or two dads, or one parent. There is a need to ensure the safety of all genders. We do need to focus on girls, given the overwhelming threat to their safety worldwide. But don't forget about the boys. Boys are violated and they don't know how to report and get support. So when we teach, while we teach girls to be safe, we have to be aware that we don't place the burden of responsibility of their safety entirely on them. And we also need to teach young boys not to violate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shakila. I will very quickly give an anecdote about this trans person who said that their 3-year-old niece asked them, "Are you a girl or a boy?" So the child was observing and forming ideas about the world and gender and how different genders behave and dress, and the child couldn't make sense of this person's gender. So she asked, "Are you a girl or a boy?" And the person said, "Well, in my head and in my heart, I'm a girl, but in my body, I'm a boy." So the 3-year-old said, "Oh, then you are a girl, because 2, the head and the heart, is more than 1, that is a body." So children can understand. They are thinking. Let's not underestimate their intelligence. Let's not shadow it with our own biases and color their mind with all kind of discriminations and stereotype them. And it's like all concepts are, you begin to tell your children as young as 1-year-old, A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever, you begin at very early age, and then you build it up. Same way, any concept of sexuality, you need to begin right from the very beginning and then build it up as a child's agency develops. So with that, we come to the end of this kind of presentation and answering of questions by the participants, by the panelists, and I will give the floor back to Khushi.
Thank you, Dr. Sangeeta, and thank you all the panelists for your valuable contributions. Few takeaways for me. I've had takeaways from all the panelists. From Vanessa, it was how we need to be the askable and the tellable adults. From Dharini, how promoting CSE and PSE, we need to localize and not just translate the education that we impart. And from Zia, thank you for giving us and sharing us perspectives and context of sexuality education in Pakistan and how it can be tailored for conservative socio-cultural and religious context by acknowledging that sexuality education has always existed historically within our cultures, and Dr. Shakila for answering the question whether children will understand diversity in sexuality and gender identities. The point there to make is that it's for us to make it understandable for them, and that they are not too young to understand it. So thank you, panelists, for that. We would now love to hear from our participants and members of the Global Coalition who are here with us in the meeting and who I'm sure have also come from very diverse backgrounds and experiences. The floor is now open for you to share your insights or ask any questions that you may have for the panelists. So there's a question by Swati. Teachers are confused how to deal with public displays of affection in high school students. Any recommendations?
Yeah, but I think we will restrict our discussion to under 7-year-olds because as the subsequent meetings, we will be moving on to preteen sexuality and then teenage sexuality and all of that. So this question would be more appropriate to address there. So we hope to see you in those meetings as well.
Pradanya, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Krushi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you to the speakers. My name is Pradnya Dulfure and I'm from Seeds of Awareness Organization. We are based in Mumbai. So I have two questions. One is to Vanessa ma'am and is for Zia sir. So should I share both the questions and then they can take the turn? Okay. So from Vanessa ma'am, I have this question. So you shared what are the principles and the core concepts. I would like to understand from you, how did you infer or arrive at that these are the principles or core principles? Like what was the process? Was it based on some research or was it based on your personal experience or both? If you would like to share some light on that. From Zia sir, I would like to know more. Like you shared that what was the response to your efforts from the government of Pakistan. I would like to know what was the response from the children or the adolescent or the young adults with whom you did these issues. Like what was their response to what you were, the sessions that you were doing with them? That's all. Thank you.
Thanks for your great question. Yes, the major aspect of how we base our education concepts are on the United Nations Education Scientific Council document of technical sexuality education. It's global evidence that tells us what we've always known, that these are the specific topics that should be taught to children, and that's reflected in the majority of the countries that I research my content from. So that's the UNESCO document, and I'll try and find it and put it in the chat, but I'm sure the organisation will share it as well. I'll leave it at there. There's lots of other sources as well, but that's a good one for global.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for this question, if I'm allowed to respond. So the children were very happy. I tell you, the parents were very happy while we were imparting this education. Particularly the parents of people living with disabilities, because they also have the similar kind of challenges. And what we learned from the teachers as well as from the parents, that their children living with disabilities, they were having greater need of such kind of information and guidance. So they were very much liking it. And in the study that we did in Pakistan, we concluded that mostly parents as well as children wanted to have this body rights body protection, education, age-appropriate education in schools. But unfortunately, the government over here is under the pressure of the religious fraternity. We have this Council of Islamic Ideology overarching the role of parliament, and therefore the parliament is unable to come up with any appropriate law promoting comprehensive sexuality education in Pakistan. This is quite unfortunate, but there is no such resistance at the end of these schools. There no such resistance at the end of parents, as well as the young children, boys and girls. We are imparting this education in the private schools. The schools which are being run through the Cambridge school systems, they are imparting this education, and they have specialized teachers, trained teachers for the comprehensive sexuality education. My daughters were studying in the Cambridge school, and they went through this course while they were in class 6th. So they start this in class 6, and then onwards up till 10th grade. So, but not unfortunately in the government schools.
Yeah. Before we take any more questions, I see one question by Sophia in the chat, and I thought I could answer that. It is about a 3-year-old who often touches her baby brother's penis and pulls it, and she's quite curious, and of late has started urinating in a standing position. How do I address this? We discussed this in detail in the previous 2 meetings. However, very briefly, yes, this is the normal socio-sexual play that 3 to 7-year-olds children engage in. They do explore each other's bodies. They're curious. They want to know why it works differently. And if he can stand and pee, why can't I? It's absolutely fine. Behavior-wise, there is no issue. However, you can also talk about how these parts are sensitive to touch. So she was pulling them. It might cause pain to the child. To the boy, that's a part of that, but not to shame her at all and say no, you should never touch this and all of that. And talk to her about it, like why are boys and girls' bodies different. You will find the answers in our PPTs, which are up there after the second meeting. We had discussed this, how to talk about differences between our bodies and link them to how bodies are made, just using simple words like baby cell and dada baby cell, mama baby cell, and that way. So
there's a question by Madhura. How do you teach sex education to children with special needs?
Again, for that, we will have a separate dedicated meeting for that, and it will require more than one meeting, I guess, because Uphold has worked extensively and we have developed the Suvidha kit for this, but we can take it up in that meeting. I don't think we will do justice to this here in this brief time.
There's a question by Kiran. What would be the role of electronic gadgets in promotion of sex education in very young children? And I'm assuming we're talking about children under the age of 7.
Would Dharani take that question?
That's a great question. When you talk about electronic gadgets, that's a huge, variety of things. But a good thing to start with children is with phones and cameras specifically, because we've noticed in a lot of our recent work that kids, learning from parents and society, like to take pictures of themselves, of other people, with people that they like. So I think they're talking about privacy and consent is a great place to kind of start that conversation. And an important thing about talking about not just electronic gadgets, but also the internet, social media, and all of that, even with children, who are aged 7 and under, because they know these things by now. An important thing there is to not demonize electronic gadgets or to demonize the internet, because that is a huge part of our culture where we say it's bad, it's dangerous, it can get you hurt. Instead, it's about talking about our values, because whatever danger that we say can happen on the internet or through these gadgets can also happen offline. So yeah, I would say start with talking about privacy and consent. That's a great place. And the second one is not to demonize or scare them about these gadgets when you're talking to them about sex and sexuality.
Thank you, Dharini. There's a question by Dr. Divya. Could we let the boys also know about the growth changes in girls, sensitizing them towards respect for the female body, and so that they know it is not right to victimize the female body, especially without consent?
Yes, I'll answer that. I guess it is you were thinking of older boys. I must reiterate that sexuality education begins from birth onwards, and it actually never ends. So it is a continuous process, and it is for all sexes, all genders. In fact, pubertal changes, and we'll talk more in the adolescent meeting about adolescent sexuality. Pubertal changes should not be presented as this is what happens in boys, this is what happens in girls. No. There are common changes which occur across in this age group, which vary depending on the chromosomes, the other hormones, and other biological factors that you may have, your nutrition, and so many other things. So the education is for all children. If possible, we give it together, but if culturally not so acceptable, then we separate them according to their gender.
Thank you, Dr. Sangeeta. Shahab, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hello, it's so nice to hear all of you. I'm with my friend Arun. We both are community workers, and we work in the Himalayan region of Uttarakhand in India. And we mostly work with a lot of rural communities and indigenous communities. We come from a urban privileged household, so we usually tend to analyze the two aspects, particularly which begin with the conversation and conclude with some technical aspects. But we see in most of our conversations, which revolve around welfare for broader citizenry in our country particularly, we see that a lot of times the 80-90% of the population in our country, which is rural and a part of an unorganized economy, is left out. Now, with that context, we're trying to understand, because I come across, we were developing a write-up and a proposal to inform the kind of a digital literacy. Before doing that, we're trying to develop a module on the perils of using internet. Because a lot of risk which we see among young children, because this conversation was about children, and access to to the digital devices is totally unwarranted, which we come across to the privileged urban households. So we see a stark distinction between a lot of indigenous communities that we know, who seem to be aware of their actions and the consequences that it might lead to. But in the urban societies, we suspect, if that is can be used as a word, it may be too strongly.
Good parenting either.
So there is something to do with the everyday economics the family is going through, a part of which also, as a consequence, what happens is young children of that particular age are also left out. I would also like to mention, because Mr. Zia mentioned about religion in particular, I see no role of religion individually. Personally, I feel there are huge variants in societies. I think that religion doesn't play a role in matters like this, because when we say conservatism, we are anywhere referring to religion, because it's not a very modern idea. So that, I think, is the only role of religion that I feel. But in the urban societies is where I see, or where we feel, that most of the situations like this occur, and we witness this firsthand. It's very, very difficult to handle these situations. So young children have been very fearful in conversing with their parents, in the families. They are very senior, adults in the family, 75 and 80-year-old. There's huge three generation living in a house. So that is the kind of situation which we find very difficult to deal with.
Moreover, in Metro and in Cosmo, the families have become nuclear, and both the parents are working. So how you see, that kid is being nurturing through, or who is nurturing them. So I think good parenting or the way of parenting is an integral aspect. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your views about this. I think there's a question for Vanessa on the chat about mother of a 3-year-old. My child is
Yep.
curious. Yeah.
That's a
Vanessa,
great question.
yes.
That's a great question. Two things I'm thinking about that is you can keep it very simple and scaffold it as they get older. So you could say simply that an egg from one body needs to meet with a seed from the other body. And maybe the 3-year-old's happy with that and wait until they ask, well, how does it get together? There is some fantastic books around that you can use to read together to scaffold that information. But my answer to this question is the same as no matter what age people ask about is, who do you want to be the person who tells the child the actual truth? You want it to be you, so you need to think about when you need to give that information. It might be they have older siblings, older cousins, someone else is going to tell them. So I actually think that many children, you seem like have an inquisitive 3-year-old, many 3, 4, 5-year-olds are actually able to understand the concept of you saying that the vagina accepts the penis. It's for adult minds and bodies only. And it's also a private conversation that we don't talk about outside of our home. And you add it in with body safety along the lines of privacy, etc. Someone else also mentioned about pleasure in conjunction with this conversation. And I'd just like to put it out there, which is pretty confronting for a lot of people, for us to think about the fact that we actually should let young people know that intimate encounters when they're older should be pleasurable, because the internet, popular culture, pornography doesn't really give them the message that everything that they do is really pleasurable. So we can talk about pleasure to children. We can say, how do you like your foot being rubbed? Would you like me to rub it softer or harder or slower, or would you like me to stop? Pleasure is not related to sex when it's age appropriate in talking about this age group, but it instills in them to expect pleasurable encounters when other people are interacting with their body. So they're complex sexual encounters, they should expect pleasure. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Vanessa. We also have answered such questions on the PPT, which is there for the second session. And we have used probably more culture, language which may be acceptable in more conservative culture. So you could refer to that. There is a question about gender. How do you respond to a child who discloses his or her sexuality as being gay in a society where gay sex is not accepted? Shakila, would you like to take that?
Yes, thanks. I'm not sure. Are you talking about under 7-year-olds here? Okay, but let's assume.
No, this is probably older, because this
it's
aspect
probably
of
older.
Yeah.
Sure, but okay, let's just take the question anyway. So I mean, the first thing is to listen and be non-judgmental to children when they try to talk to you about themselves, however they might be different. Let's say, I'm not sure, am I stretching it a bit if I say, would it be how we would respond to a child, given that right-handedness is a norm? How would we respond to a child that says, I want to use my left hand to write? Is that stretching the diversity?
No, Shakila, but many parents have forced the children to use the right hand. To eat and to write and to dress and to all of that. But yes, we do get to your point that you're making. Fabulous, you have put that question. And yes, it is to say that Many a time our laws are drafted by people and they are humans, and they may not be totally educated and informed about the diversity that exists in nature, which is part of all of us. So sometimes our laws are not totally fair to all people. Right? So you are not saying just because the law says it's not okay, so it's not okay. No, laws also change, they're made by us, whereas our bodies, our natures, so much of us is a part of nature's diversity, and we need to respect that and accept it, because we didn't make it. Guess what? We didn't make ourselves cisgender or heterosexual or homosexual or any of that. Can we make space for each other? Yeah. Anybody else has a
We'll
question? Yeah.
we'll
Yeah,
take
over to
two
you,
more
Khushi.
questions, or we'll actually take one more question. Before that, Himanshu has requested for any parenting books focusing on the subject, which is of PSE and CSE for under 7-year-olds. If any of the panelists would like to recommend, they can write in the chat box or they can unmute and tell.
I have a free one that does not cost. It's from the Western Australian government, which is a state within Australia. I will link it here, but please know that it's steeped in Western culture. But it is something that you could use as a base to adapt that is appropriate. It's called Talk Soon, Talk Often, and I'll put the link in the chat.
And also on Uphold's website. Sanjana, if you could just project our website and take them to the resources page. There are two resources. One is called the Demystifying Sexuality Reference Book. In that, there is sexual development of children and adolescents, and each chapter has a section on how to engage children in these discussions. We also have a whole series of Demystifying Sexuality video series in which there's a talk about how to discuss sexuality with your adolescents as well as with children. They're talking about personal safety with children. So if you could write to us, we could actually send you the links. Otherwise, you could discover them here on our website.
We'll take one last question by Shruti. When a child asks why they can't give consent for someone to touch them until they are adult, how to answer the exploration curiosity here? So how do we answer when a child asks why they can't give consent?
Vanessa.
Yeah, well, I would argue that a child should be able to give consent. But for example, when they're children, sometimes they can't give consent to things that might relate to their health and safety. So if an adult needs to grab their hand to cross the road, they can't consent to that. If they need to have an injection or a vaccination, they can't consent to that. But when they are older, they will be able to. But there's lots of other things they can consent to. They can consent to how long they play a game with their friend. They can say to their family, I don't want to have a back rub or tickling anymore. So I would argue children should be able to consent to lots of things about their bodies. But yes, when it comes to health and safety, they don't always get to make that decision till they're older. I hope that answers the question.
I would also add that the exploration between children is part of their natural development, whereas all these ideas about consent are with the idea of safety and abuse, prevention of abuse. We should not conflate the two. We should not say, don't touch anyone without their consent. No, touch is a very much part of our development. Right? And this particular kind of touch helps development of their sexual map. And again, I refer you to our previous two meetings. We have discussed this in quite a bit of detail.
Very
One last
quickly.
question,
Yeah, sure.
please. Yeah, I just want to ask, one is that when children in the classroom touch their private parts, so how do teachers kind of, disengage them from it, or should we allow it? What makes them do it? And second is, where can we get the PPTs and other resources you're talking about? Can we get a recording of the meeting also? Yeah.
Yeah, they're all on our website. If you go to the Global Coalition page, it's on the header, the Global Coalition on our homepage, and then you go to that page, you will see it very clearly marked out, the videos and the PPTs. At school, depending on the age of the children, if they are, say, in grade 1 onwards, you can say in the, they by grade age 6, they have developed modesty.
Ma'am, they are in KG actually, kindergarten.
KG and all, they will touch. You can just kind of ignore it. It's part of their self-exploration. A good way is to also distract them and say, let's have this activity, that. They often touch themselves to soothe themselves, or if they're bored and stuff like that. But never guilt them for it, never shame them for it, never says, "Cheat, too dirty, now go wash your hands and come." Just say, let's do some coloring. Who would like to color? Who would like to play? It's this, or something like that.
Thanks a lot. Is your meeting recorded, ma'am?
Yes.
Yes.
Zia has his hand up, and before that, I saw Anup Hore with his hand up. So, Anup, would you?
Thank you, Dr. Sangeeta. I was just listening. As you know, that I work with an organization called Plan India, and I'm from India, Jharkhand state. I just wanted to know that is any country, especially third world country, where the comprehensive sexuality education have been institutionalized by the government, or what have been the challenges? I presume that it is not institutionalized in India, or any updates are there in course of doing it in India, because I understand that whatever amount of small bits we do through our NGOs and institutions, small institutions, but after all, it's the government institution which is going to make it sustain and do it for a scale. So, any experience of that sort?
Yeah, I am not aware of any. Australia, is it mandatory?
It's compulsory in most of Australia. However, it's done in variable amounts of adequacy. So some regions and some schools do it very well, some don't do it very well, but we actually do it quite well. The countries like the Netherlands and Scandinavian countries, so if you look up resources in the Netherlands, it's very well embedded across the country from a political perspective.
And Anup, that is the idea of this coalition, is to normalize sexuality education in our homes and have parents demand the government to have it in this. Because the government is made up of politicians who are always pleasing the vote bank. And once the vote bank begins to ask for it, they will provide it.
Okay. Thank you, Dr.
Right.
Sangeeta.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Anu, for your question as well. Once again, I'd like to thank all our panelists, Vanessa, Dharani, Zia, and Dr. Shakila for chairing today's panel, as well as Dr. Sangeeta for moderating the discussion. Big thank you to all the participants for sharing the insights and questions in the meeting. It was truly heartwarming to see everyone's active participation, and I'm sure it has offered a lot of perspective and nuance to everyone's understanding on the topic of CSE and PSE for under 7-year-olds. To capture all these great ideas, insights, and perspectives that have been raised by everyone, we will be compiling all the deliberations into a Google document. This document will be shared with all the members of the Global Coalition via email for review and suggestions. We encourage you to review it carefully and provide any feedback in the document. It'll be open for discussion for 4 weeks, after which we will finalize the document based on the feedback received. So the final version of the document will be then uploaded on the Global Coalition page on our website, and Sanjana will be sharing the screen. She's already sharing the screen. Yeah, so this is the website. She shared the link to the website as well on the chat. On the same note, if you're not a member of the Global Coalition already, you can become one by filling the Google form link, which is again on our website. Sanjana can hover her mouse on top of that. The link will again be shared on the chat box as well. Membership is free and open to everyone from all professional and non-professional backgrounds. The coalition provides a very valuable platform to its members to share their experiences and voice the support they need from the coalition to promote CSE among individuals, families, and institutions in their own countries. Through the collaborative efforts of our members, we can design and amplify campaigns globally and advocate more effectively with governments and institutions. Additionally, promoting CSE and personal safety education requires a 360-degree approach. And through this coalition, we aim to create a network of nodal coordinators who will champion this cause of promoting and implementing CSE in their own local regions. So this network will include individuals from, again, diverse backgrounds, such as parents, adolescents, educators, health professionals, media and content developers, individuals from corporate, religious and spiritual leaders, as well as policymakers and government officials. The list is endless. So we invite you to volunteer as the city node for your area and help create this nodal network wider. Again, the link for the nodal to become a volunteer for the nodal network is on the website as well as sent on the chat by Sanjana. Yes. Great. So with this, we come to the end of the third quarterly meeting of the Global Coalition. Thank you, dear members, panelists, and everyone who attended the meeting today for your active participation and valuable contributions. We hope to hear from you soon and meet you at the next quarterly meeting, which is scheduled on 9th October 2024.
So since we still seem to have 2 minutes left according to my clock, Zia wanted to share something. May we hear from you, Zia, if you're there still?
Okay, I just wanted to share one interesting thought on this consent part. The children under the age of 7 or even below, their body language expresses, even if they are not expressing their behavior or whatever towards what they do not like to listen, or they like to hear, or they like for their own bodies. So their body language is quite expressive. Personally, my 2 years old son, once I was just changing his nappy in front of another friend of mine who visited my home, and he was sitting, and I wrongly decided to change his nappy, and he did not like that. So later on, my wife, she's a psychiatrist, so she told me that look at his behavior. He did not like this because he didn't want to be naked in front of another person who is stranger to him. So to me, I think this is very, very important. We need to understand the body language of our children.
Yes.
If they don't like that, good touch, bad touch things.
On that note, I was so surprised. My 1-year-old granddaughter, I was tickling her with a soft toy, and when I tickled her here and here, she was laughing. But when I tickled her on her tummy, she just pushed that thing away. Just pushed it away. For whatever reason, she didn't want to be tickled on her tummy. And you have to be very aware and tuned to their bodily cues. So thank you, everybody. And there was a question about researchers are here. So we want a list of all the members, and in that, what are you affiliated with and what resources you have. And of course, the resources that we receive, we would go through them and have a core group of people here who can vet the resources, and then they would be made available for use by all members of the coalition. So we hope to connect people and use each other's resources that are freely available for this. Thank you again. Thank you, Khushi and Sanjana and all the panelists. Lovely to have you all.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Thank you, Sangeeta.
Thank you, everyone.